What's up, everybody? My name is Kenneth, and I'm a foreigner living in the Philippines, here today to react and learn to how ISIS managed to capture a city in the Philippines. This video was recommended to me by Ron Strom Gaming, so thank you very much for the recommendation. I asked for a video actually on this topic when I was watching another video on this channel. About this Moro Insurgency, it's called. Basically, the south of the Philippines trying to break away and achieve independence. And I wanted to know more about this. So Ron actually sent me this video, and it looks really interesting. So I really want to check this out. I had no idea that the ISIS was in the Philippines. I thought that was in the Middle East and also some like terror attacks in Europe and stuff. I had no idea they were in the Philippines. That is very interesting. Also, this insurgency in general, I don't know anything about. So I thought it would be interesting to watch this video and learn about that. Alright guys, so let's just get started with this video. Let's go.
In 2014, the black jihadist flag was raised by men wearing balaclavas who proclaimed themselves to be part of ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, owing to the location of
Iraq and Syria, and you're in the Philippines. It's so far away.
Their conquests in both Iraq and across the border in Syria. Their wider name is sometimes referred to as ISIL, which is the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, owing to their wider presence in the Middle East. But it didn't stop there in the Middle East, as to the west they also inspired acts of terror and had many people from Western countries, most famously France, Germany, the United Kingdom and Belgium, going over and joining in their struggle. But their influence also went the other way to the Far East and inspired terrorist movements.
Yeah, I knew about all the other stuff he said about how they did recruitment in Europe and stuff like that. But the Far East part, I didn't even know they were here. So that's really interesting to me.
Especially in Southeast Asia, to take up the black flag as their own and swear allegiance to ISIS, especially in the Philippines, which is what I want to talk about in this video. As in the Philippines, there was a particularly bloody insurrection against the government already ongoing that got renewed energy from their declaring allegiance to ISIS in the Middle East. And in this
the insurgents in the south of the Philippines, basically, they were already fighting against the Philippine government, and then they actually decided to swear allegiance to ISIS. I mean, that's extreme. That's no longer like fighting for independence. That's like supporting terrorism. Like, did they get punished for that? Like the leaders, I mean? Interesting.
Video, I want to look at ISIS in the Philippines. But before that, to find out about how ISIS gained a foothold in the Philippines, we need to look at the history of the Philippines itself and how Islam came there in the first place. Because the Philippines in Southeast Asia isn't that close to Arabia, the birthplace of Islam. And yet today, around from 5% to some estimates go up to 10% of the Philippines population are Muslim. The Philippines Muslims are concentrated largely in the south, in the province of Mindanao, as well as Sulu and the island chain in the very south of the Philippines. And these chains had contact to an old trading network with the rest of the world, and this is how in the 40s...
Makes sense. Also closer to Indonesia and Malaysia, which are Muslim states. So yeah, that makes sense.
19th century, Muslims started to arrive there as traders and then started to preach and to build mosques on these southern islands and in Mindanao. While Islam was being established in the south, it joined the religion of Buddhism and Hinduism in other parts of what are now the Philippines, although another religion would be added permanently in 1565 when the Spanish established their first colony in the Philippines after having discovered it from a European perspective in the early 16th century. In 1571, they conquered the Kingdom of Manila and founded the capital city today, Manila, which still, as I said, is the capital city and left an important imprint on the Filipino population as the Spanish brought Christianity to the Philippines and started to convert the local population. The Spanish conquistadores, you might call them, so the soldiers and missionaries that came over, saw this as part of the Reconquista, which had been won around 100 years earlier in Spain. I made a video on this if you want to see it. Still quite a popular video that was actually relating to more recent events once again. But essentially this led to them calling some of the local Muslim population Moro, which is the Spanish word for the English Moor, which was the word that they had given to the peoples in the south of Spain who were also...
That's where the word Moro comes from. Okay, I thought that was like a place in the Philippines, but it's come from the word more. Huh.
Muslim at the time and who they were trying to convert and initially defeat in the Reconquista. And so they use the word Moro, which shows you something of the Spanish conquering mindset towards the Muslims they encountered in the south. And they forcibly tried to convert many of these people, although those in the south were not very much in favor, and so were fighting a near constant guerrilla war against the Spanish occupiers, who failed to really establish a centralized government in these southern regions due to all the unrest. Now in 1898...
They didn't really conquer the south of the Philippines, Mindanao region. Didn't really become a colony of Spain. I remember learning that.
Spain would go to war with the United States in the aptly named Spanish-American War, which they would go on to lose. However, the Philippines itself had already been fighting against the Spanish and declared their own independence in 1899, although the Americans weren't too happy about their new colony not wanting to be a colony anymore, and this started the Philippine-American War, in which the Americans defeated the new Philippine Republic and classed it as their own territory, although they're very anti-imperialistic, keep that in mind. Just as with the Spanish when they had arrived centuries earlier, however, the peoples of the south, those the Spanish had called the Moros, continued to fight against the Americans, wanting to establish their own independent state called...
Right, but I think the Americans eventually managed to subdue them or integrate them into the Philippines. But I guess that didn't last because they're declaring independence now.
Bangas Moro, the people of Moro. And it was only in 1913 that the Moro War was finally brought to an end with an American victory and reprisals against the southern Muslim populations that had resisted them for so long. In 1935, the Philippines would make more of a move towards independence and was granted the state of Commonwealth by the United States, although in 1942 with the...
What's the difference there? I guess they were a territory first and then they became a Commonwealth. But what does that entail in practice? Like, what's the difference? Did they like get to vote or... I don't know.
Of the Imperial Japanese in the South Pacific, they were invaded and conquered after the Americans were humiliatingly defeated by the Japanese. However, in the South, the Moros, who had been not until that long ago rebelling against the Americans, those holdouts from the Moro War, in a matter of weeks had turned their arms on the Japanese and continued the struggle, showing again how much of a rebellion...
They don't care who's occupying them. They're just gonna fight against anyone. Spanish, American, Philippines, Japanese, don't matter. They're just fighting everyone. They didn't try to like ally anyone. They're just fighting everyone.
As people in the South, they were having gone straight from fighting the Spanish to then fighting the Americans to then fighting the Japanese, and they were some of the biggest problems for the Japanese in the Philippines as they continued to fight back against their occupation until the liberation in 1945, when the Philippines became an independent country. The Filipino government wanted to ensure that the differences between Christians and Muslims were really brought to a minimum and to create some kind of unified national identity as Filipinos, but these plans required continuing others that had been done since colonial times.
But what I don't get is like if they constantly were fighting anyone who tried to occupy them, Spanish, Americans, in the Philippine government, and then the Japanese, like how did the Philippines manage to incorporate these territories? Like how did they get them to stop fighting basically? I don't get that part.
By both the Spanish and the Americans, which was to settle Christians in the largely Muslim South, and to the point where in the larger cities, Christians started to outnumber the traditional Muslim inhabitants of these regions, which contributed to religious and sometimes ethnic conflict between them. In 1968, this would spill over in what became known as the Jabida Massacre, the background of which was that Moro soldiers fighting in the Philippines army and who were Muslim had apparently been killed by non-Muslim soldiers when they mutinied. This was because they found out that the mission they were training for was to attack the neighbouring country of Malaysia, which was over the northeastern part of the island of Sabah.
Wait, what? The Philippines was planning to, or training to attack Malaysia? Because I was wondering in the previous video, they said the Philippines claims Malaysia, and I was wondering if war could break out between the two, and I didn't think so. But apparently they're training for missions to attack Malaysia. This was in 1960, so maybe they're not planning this anymore. Did they ever try? Did they ever try to use this plan? And like, did the Philippines ever attack Malaysia?
Which had once been ruled by the Sulu Sultanate, which is now split between the Philippines and Malaysia. And the Malaysian government at the time was in control of this island of Sabah, and the Filipino government wanted to take it, saying that it had a historic claim. However, the Malaysians were fellow Muslims, as were these soldiers from the Moro area, and so they mutinied against their commanders, saying they wouldn't start this war, and then were killed. There are
Start this war, so the Philippines was actually planning a war against Malaysia to get this territory back? That's super interesting to me. Now I need another video about like if that ever happened. I guess there's no video if it didn't happen, but yeah, if that did happen, I want to learn more about that.
Accounts of the massacre, with certain sides claiming different numbers and figures of how many people were killed and why exactly. So it's a bit tricky to see what actually.
So the military, the Christian Filipinos, when they heard that the Muslim Filipinos were mutinying, they decided to shoot them. Was this like illegal? Because I know some armies, they have death penalty if you mutiny. So was this like, oh, that's just the punishment everyone gets? Or was this because they were Muslim and mutinying, and it was like illegal rogue soldiers acting by themselves without like orders from the top, basically? I'd be interested to know that.
But this was enough to spark great tensions in the south, as they claimed that this had been a massacre due to the religion of the cadets. The situation worsened in 1972 when the president at the time, Ferdinand Marcos, also claimed martial law and became president for much longer than he should have been, in another classic takeover and abuse of power. He also cracked down on various groups of dissent, such as communists, as well as Muslims, so also further angering the Muslim population and the political opposition. And this led to a man called Nur Misauri starting the MNLF, or the Moro National.
I've heard MNLF in the comments, people have been mentioning them, but I don't know anything about this. It stands for the Moro National Liberation Front. Interesting.
Liberation Front, which worked to gain more autonomy for the southern region and again to restore democratically elected presidents to the position. So they were obviously an Islamic group, considering the fact that they were made of the Moro, who were a Muslim people. But actually, I wouldn't describe them particularly as Islamist, because they worked more for egalitarian values rather than the creation of a necessarily Islamic state, and would later condemn other Islamist groups. In 1974.
So what did they want then? Just independence, but under like a democracy? Yeah, I wonder why they didn't want to be a part of the Philippines.
Or in 1974, in the southern island of Jolo, there would be fierce fighting between MNLF fighters and the Filipino army, in which allegedly 1,000.
Also, I'm very confused, because the previous video we watched in Geography Now, they said that the insurgents wanted to break free and go to war with Malaysia, or take back that territory, Sabah, from Malaysia. The Muslim insurgents wanted to do this. But here it says they were planning to take the territory back, and then the Muslims mutinied. So which one is it? Like, did they want to take this territory back, or are they very much against going to war with Malaysia? I feel like that's kind of unclear to me. Please let me know in the comments.
In which 1,000 people praying in a mosque were murdered by the Philippines army, further creating a sense of some people. Filipino army of Jolo, there would be fierce fighting between MNLF fighters and the Filipino army, in which allegedly 1,000.
Why are they fighting? The MNLF are like illegal rebels, basically. So the Philippines is trying to like control the territory, I'm guessing, and then this tragedy happens.
In which 1,000 people praying in a mosque were murdered by the Philippines army, further creating a sense of divide between the Philippine state and the regular Muslims living in the south. In 1976, however, they came to a peace agreement called the Tripoli Agreement. It stated that the Moro region would remain part of the Philippines, but Bangas Moro would get a certain degree of autonomy. although Marcos actually later went back on his word and violence resumed. In 1978, there was a split in the MNLF, with the creation by Sheikh Salamat Hashim of the
What?
MILF, or Moro Islamic Liberation Front. In 1986, however, during the People Power Revolution, Marcos was removed from power.
People Power Revolution. I've heard that sentence thrown around, but I don't know anything about that. That seems like a good concept for me to learn more about. I think that was like a big deal here in the Philippines. If there's a good video on that revolution, please suggest that to me in the comments.
And Corazon Aquina came, and she was more willing to sit down with the rebels and work out a peaceful solution, which they did in 1989, and this led to the foundation of the ARMM, or the Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. And this basically gave more power to the autonomous Muslim regions in the south, so the 5 majority Muslim...
That's so generic though, like more power. What does that mean? Like what exactly is the difference here? What's the autonomy they got?
provinces became semi-autonomous from the Philippines, still within the Philippines, but with more rights and more decided by the people actually living there.
More rights? Like what right does a person living here have that someone living in Manila does not have? How do they have more rights? I don't understand that. It's so generic. A lot of these videos, I feel like they don't really explain the main topic.
Not all were happy with the new peace, however, and in 1991, breaking away from the MILF was Abu Sayyaf, which in Arabic means the father of the swordsmith. Its leaders were inspired when they had met a certain Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Of course, at the time he was still the popular poster child of the West, as the Mujahideen were fighting against the Soviet invasion there. In 1996, growing peace talks led to what was called a final peace agreement between the warring sides, and for the first time the MNLF agreed to a complete ceasefire. However, the MILF did not agree, and so fighting continued with them, as well as the increasingly radical Abu Sayyaf. In 1998, with the election of the new president Joseph Estrada, this came to an all-new level as he declared all-out war against the rebels and successfully...
Really? I haven't heard about this president, the name, I've never heard that name. So a lot of like modern Philippine history I don't know about.
Successfully attacked many of the MILF bases and camps that had been established in the southern region, where they were really the de facto power in the area. Thousands of prisoners surrendered, and the Filipino flag was for the first time in a very long time flown over the areas of Mindanao and other important cities in the region.
It wasn't even flown around, so this was basically an independent area then. If the Philippine flag wasn't even flown around that area. I mean, that's pretty severe, right?
Heralding the victory of the Filipino army over particularly the MILF group. However, this in the early 2000s prompted a spate of terrorist attacks against the Filipino state, including in the capital Manila, as well as in southern areas, claiming the lives of hundreds of innocent civilians. Abu Sayyaf, which was becoming a leading group in the area, was becoming increasingly barbarous in their attacks, often killing people in very theatric ways, as well as kidnapping and demanding for ransom, and using the particularly brutal method of beheading those that they had captured with the bolo knives, which were native to the region. In 2002, the United States got involved in the area, expanding Operation Enduring Freedom the Philippines by training Filipino soldiers in counterinsurgency, and marked the Philippines as a crucial area in the war on terror, giving all these Islamist groups in the area. Now, jumping forward to 2013, and what might
I didn't know that. So the war on terror was not just in the Middle East; it was in the Philippines also, kinda. It was the Philippines was involved also. Didn't know that. Things you never learn in school.
Like a surprising step is that the MNLF actually declared war on Abu Sayyaf and went and cleared out several of their camps.
Because I wonder what the MNLF really wants. Just more autonomy, but they got that, right? Now they're friendly to the Philippine government and they're helping kind of get rid of these extremists. That's the way I'm interpreting this.
While they were both for Moro autonomy, remember the MNLF was more about promoting egalitarianism and more autonomy in the area, and they saw the very violent, brutal methods of Abu Sayyaf as going against the core Islamic teachings and doctrine, and therefore declared war on the group. Moving
Okay.
forward to 2014 is an interesting time, as this is the first time the MILF actually signed a peace agreement with the Filipino state and laid down their arms in exchange for Bangsamoro becoming a more autonomous region and being recognized.
Even more autonomous, or just another autonomous region? And what does that mean? Like, what do they gain precisely? They get to like have different rules. They make their own laws. They get their own elections. I don't know.
By the Filipino government. However, Abu Sayyaf in the same year also had an interesting development. And this is that the leader of Abu Sayyaf, Isnilon Totoni Hapilon, declared himself for the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria in a video that he posted to YouTube, along with other Islamist splinter groups such as the Maute in the region, also declaring their allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was the caliph at the time. In 2016, Hapilon was recognized as the emir of the region and was known to be intact with the Syrian and Iraqi ISIS group, as they found training manuals from there and other uniforms and doctrinal texts were linking to them when the Filipino army conducted raids on several important...
Now I'm really interested what will happen to them now, after you declare allegiance to ISIS.
Sites in the Philippines. But in 2017, this is when the most dramatic event in the most recent Islamist insurgencies in the Philippines occurred. And this was in the city of Marawi, which is in the southern area of Mindanao, as you can see. And this occurred when they thought, the Filipino army and the police, they thought that they had a chance at getting Hapsilon, who was inside the city of Marawi at the time, and they went in with a team to extract him. However, they were then engaged by the armed men of Hapsilon who were in the city, who then called for reinforcements from the Maute group, who had a strong presence in the area, to the point where there were hundreds or potentially thousands of insurgents inside the city, at which point the Filipino army also called in for reserves, and this resulted in a 5-month siege when these insurgents...
A 5-month siege of a big Filipino town? For some insurgent? Wow, that's like a full-on war. It's like a civil war almost.
Occupied key buildings like the university, a hospital, as well. When these insurgents occupied key buildings like the university, a hospital, as well as setting a cathedral on fire inside Marawi itself. And this was...
They occupied the university and the theater, they burnt that. What?
A difficult struggle for the Filipino army, because it was basically a whole city that was being taken over by these Islamist groups.
That's like an enemy army like occupying a city. That's crazy.
And they had trained very much with the Americans on jungle.
How was it for civilians living in Marawi under this occupation rule? Like, did any atrocities happen? How was that experience?
Warfare and amphibious assaults in outside terrain, but not so much fighting in urban environments, which is what occurred here. And they actually sent in the Air Force to drop bombs on important parts.
Does the Philippines have mandatory conscription for men, or in general? In Norway, you have mandatory conscription, and you know, with all the war here and the insurgents and stuff, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you have that here also. Let me know in the comments.
Of the city to capture these leaders. Although after 5 months they were ultimately successful, Omar Maute, which is one of the leaders of the Maute group, as well as Hapsilon, were both killed during the attack. But in 2019 as well, they succeeded in...
It's very recent, so is it safe to travel to Mindanao? I feel like that's kind of scarier, right? Is it like statistically more dangerous? I wonder.
Completely destroying the Maute group, which was a big step forward for peace in the region. Interestingly enough, Filipino nationals have also been recognized as among the dead in the Middle East themselves, fighting on the ground for the Islamic State when it still existed, which seems to confirm that in 2017 several of the leaders from the aforementioned groups like Maute and Abu Sayyaf were calling for those who were unable to go to the Middle East to come and take up the call of jihad at home in the Philippines, which they did to disastrous consequences in place.
Wow. That's crazy. So even if some Filipinos traveled, or some of these Muslim extremists went to the Middle East to fight.
Places like Marawi. And in 2020, there were several more attempted attacks in the Philippines, although these have somewhat died down under the presidency of Duterte when he took a very strong stance against them in Marawi and other areas as well.
I see. I mean, this is very recent. That's kind of scary, right?
But time will tell how the rest of the insurgency goes, as it's been a very long time that the southern region of the Philippines has been rebelling, and it doesn't seem like an end to the conflict is anywhere in sight.
So they haven't even ended the conflict now in 2025. It's still ongoing? How do you solve this? At this point, like, just grant them independence, man. Just stop attacking our cities. That's what I would say.
But anyway, I think I'm going to leave this video there because that's quite a lot to digest here, and there's a very long history in this area with various ideas of autonomy and wanting more independence, as well as, of course, the more modern streams of this kind of extremist Islamic viewpoint, which is not held by the majority of the people in that area, as you could see with the MNLF, this other group that was fighting against Abu Sayyaf because they disagreed with how violent they were being and that it goes against things that are written in scriptures. But I thought it was a very interesting topic to look at as well, because there is also this other side going on to a lot of the more violent Islamic extremism in the East, in places like Southeast Asia. But anyway, let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed this video. Give me any suggestions.
Right, and that's the end of the video. This was a really good video. I learned a lot new. This is from History with Gilbert, so definitely check this out. Thank you for recommending this video. It was very interesting. And if you guys have any other videos you want to recommend me, then please let me know in the comments and I'll check it out, and I'll give you credit also if I end up reacting to that video. Alright guys, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and like. I make daily videos of me reacting to the Philippines, so if that's something you're interested in, then you should subscribe to stay tuned. Alright guys, I'll see you in the video tomorrow then. Bye bye.